January 2nd, 2022. It's been 2 years to the day, folks, that I hosted Jordan Maxwell. Jordan Maxwell joined Discussions of Truth January 2nd, 2020. And that was just the beginning of the COVID-19 lockdowns. Just within 6 or 7 weeks of hosting Jordan, we went into the lockdowns. Jordan has had a presence in Hollywood as a consultant for various films, including those done by Steven Spielberg and others. He is a wealth of information at the age of, I think, maybe 81, 82 now. But that's the January 2nd date here for Discussion of Truth. Today we bring on Dr. Carole, the terrorist therapist. Her site is terroristtherapist.com. A couple things to think about when you consider the United States and how it is politically divided today, and you think of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 and how it, according to many sources, including myself, and that includes Anthony Sabatini, the Florida representative, that the Federal Reserve Act is unconstitutional and should be repealed. That's a direct quote from Sabatini. He's not the only one, folks. Ron Paul, Mark Fitchman, Arizona, there are many now that are, especially in this younger generation, people like Ron Paul, of course, are veterans in the political field. And people such as Sabatini are not, and it is becoming more aware that the Federal Reserve is a corrupt institution. So from that point, you have to consider 1620, the Mayflower, why they left England, the religious freedom-seeking voyage, which was successful. But a couple of things I think about. You've got, of course, the winter solstice, now about a week in the past. We're in a new year, and historically, government and religion have definitely thread together, and that's the great victory of the United States, is that it's been able to keep a separation of church and state, and it has set a beacon for other nations to follow. Unfortunately, for the past 120 years, that has not been the case, and these engineered wars have brought further corruption in the war game, in international in an international movement to unify nations. That's called the United Nations. So who is behind this? Because that's not an American brainchild. The United Nations is not like, America, you did such a great thing with your Constitution, your Bill of Rights, and let's adopt that. It's been used as a guise, in my opinion, that spreading, quote, democratic values, if you will. However, that's not the case. What I find in my research, you can find iantruche.com, go to the research tab, and you find a former Stanford Hoover fellow that explains the corruption in the banking system quite well. All the roads, folks, lead to the former Roman Empire, and Rome is a continued constant. So yes, I do point fingers at the corruption in the Vatican, and they should be considered. Absolutely, they should be considered. We are using their calendar, Gregorian calendar, and who is to say, folks, that these things should not be questioned. I'm not, and I am certainly questioning them. So a couple things to throw at you as something. Take things from a wider brushstroke, and look at this. In Boston, the Puritans, in the year of, get this year for you, 1659, they banned Christmas. So what is Christmas? It's a mass, a Catholic mass of Christ. That's what it is. That's what Christ Mass is, the celebration of the so-called birth of Christ, even though there's conflicting interests and reports and research around the birth of Christ, if you believe in Christ. And a lot of that is relevant to the spring. So was Christ a real? Was he a person? Was he a savior? Is he what these religions say was? I'm just asking questions. Is all. Don't want to offend you at all. So don't be offended. It's not meant to be offended. Whosoever shall be found observing any such day as Christmas or the like, either by forbearing of labor, feasting, or any other way, is subject to a 5-shilling fine. And that's Boston in 1659. They simply banned Christmas. And this is a religious group. But then they saw the possible manipulative waves of this outreach and stretch from a meshing of religion and governance. That's my opinion on why the Puritans banned Christmas. But yeah, this is probably something that you have never considered, as I simply have never considered. And we're going to bring on Carole here momentarily, but consider this: June 26th of 1870. That's 1870. That's 150 years after the Pilgrims arrived on Plymouth Rock, and it's almost 100 years since the Declaration of Independence. Oh, I've got those numbers wrong. 250 years, pardon me, of the arrival of Plymouth Rock, and then just about 100 years that since the Declaration of Independence, that Christmas was even a national holiday. So for almost 100 years of the existence of the United States as we know it, certainly as we knew of it or know of it, what it was, the 13 colonies, 100 years passed before Christmas, the Mass of Christ, became a national holiday. There's good reason for that. Food for thought, folks. Food for thought, and that is the premise of what everybody should be doing. If you're listening to this program, is you be questioning authority, questioning things. That is truly where great freedom is achieved in the ability to not be censored, and the ability to be questioned. And we're in an age of dire censorship. So we're going to transition now into Giselle. What's her name? Giselle, actually Epstein. This Epstein issue with Giselle Maxwell. Was that her name? That's her name. This is a woman that was found guilty of being an accomplice to this Epstein fiasco and Epstein Island and the shenanigans that were going on there. So Giselle Maxwell trial will be the topic of conversation with Dr. Carole Lieberman. Phoning her in right now. Folks, Happy New Year, 2021. Happy New Year, and make it the best you can. Defend your constitutional rights. I'll tell you that much.
Hello?
Yes, Dr. Carole Lieberman. It's Ian Trottier here. Welcome to Discussions of Truth.
Yes, hi.
Happy New Year to you, Carole, and thank you for joining the program. We wanted to discuss your expertise in regards to various things happening in the United States, and certainly your website, the Terrorist Therapist, is one that I've mentioned for listeners to go to. So terrorism is certainly one thing that Americans have been dealing with for now a couple decades, and certainly before that as well. But of recent news this past week was Giselle Maxwell. What are you finding in regards to what happened in that situation?
Well, I think that it is awful how people are dancing on her grave when the verdict came in, as compared to people who are murderers and rapists and who are getting out of jail free or with low bail and are doing things like the man who drove through the parade and killed lots of people in Waukesha. I mean, that is a lot worse than what Ghislaine Maxwell did.
Right. So that's a really good point. What did Giselle Maxwell? What did she do for listeners to understand? What did she do? What was she found guilty of? Yeah.
She was found guilty of basically trafficking women, young minors, and in order for Jeffrey Epstein to be able to sexually abuse them, which of course is terrible. I am certainly not endorsing sexual abuse of any kind, but I'm just trying to put it in perspective. It's just, if he were still alive, she probably wouldn't have been on trial altogether, but she certainly wouldn't have been found guilty of all of these things, because the women, her accusers, when they were giving testimony in depositions and talking to investigators and so on, before Jeffrey Epstein died, when they thought that they were going to be testifying in a trial against him, everything was about how horrible he was and all the bad things that he did. Then he died under mysterious circumstances, and and now they had to sort of regroup and make Ghislaine the biggest monster.
Mm-hmm. Right, and so there's got to be a finger pointing. It sounds like, and she's the one that the finger is being pointed on. For listeners to understand, Epstein. It's thought that he perhaps committed suicide, but like you said, it was a very timely death. She's been found guilty of aiding him. In your research, have you found any larger type of ring going on that Americans should be considering or looking into in regards to, outside of Epstein and Giselle? I think I'm mispronouncing her name. Is there something else that Americans should be concerned about?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, because really these kinds of things are going on every day. I mean, there are young girls being trafficked every single day, but it's happening, not by people who are as famous or wealthy as Ghislaine or Jeffrey Epstein. So they don't get to be in the news, like these people do. But I mean, this is a terrible thing, and yes, it has to be stomped out wherever it is. But it's not like she's the only one in America, or he was the only one in America doing it. I work as a forensic psychiatrist and an expert witness, and so I've been involved in a lot of cases of sexual abuse, usually on the side of the victims, like, for example, the victims of pre-sex abuse, but sometimes on the side of the alleged perpetrators, because it turns out that in those cases that the women who, and sometimes men are obviously abused too, that sometimes people lie. Surprise, surprise. Sometimes accusers are saying these things, making these accusations for secondary gain, meaning money or fame when it is a high-profile case, or some other benefit.
Yeah, and do you think that Ghislaine, do you think that she perhaps is a victim to this type of setup, or is this a woman that simply was involved with some wrongdoing and is found guilty for a crime?
Well, it's so interesting. I was just thinking about that today. How, like women, for the most part, women would rally around the accusers, and yet Ghislaine has been abused in a sense, or used in a sense, as well. Now, I'm not saying that she didn't have a voluntary part in this. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. But it all has to do with her childhood and her father. When she was born, her older brother was in a car accident just a few days after she was born. And so for the first 6 years of her life, her family was obsessed with the brother who was in a coma, and he finally died after 6 years. But when Ghislaine was about 3 or 4 years old, she went to her mother and she stomped her feet and she said, "I exist." Now, and so then her parents realized that they had been ignoring her. And then she became spoiled, particularly by her father. But it wasn't all positive. Her father was very demanding of all his children. And even though she was his favorite, he was also viciously demanding of her. And then when he died, also interestingly under suspicious circumstances, she then came to New York and she then met Jeffrey Epstein. And she was really looking for a father figure, looking for someone to replace her father. And she did his bidding just like she did her father's bidding.
Yeah, and this is an intelligent woman having gone to Oxford, French-born. Let's look at the implications here in regards to a society that it certainly does exist in the United States, but may possibly draw in some other notable figures in politics and or in entertainment. Do you see any ties outside of Maxwell and Epstein, that this may be affecting the average American citizen, whereas they should be looking into perhaps associations that some of these other public figures may be having inside of their connections with Epstein. For instance, the Epstein Island, right? I think people like maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed that Bill Gates had been photographed being aboard the Epstein plane. Bill Clinton. Does anything like that alarm you?
Alarm me? Well, so far, with those two people, it doesn't alarm me. I wouldn't mind at all if they were brought into this, if they were exposed as having been people who appreciated the girls that she brought in.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at some of the things about the terrorists. Would you tell listeners what you've done in regards to terrorists? You're a 3-time Emmy honored psychiatrist. You've been in that industry for quite a while. You have a notable name. How has America dealt with this threat of terrorism? And tell listeners a little bit about the contributions that you've made in regards to helping people receive therapy in that regard.
Well, it's not just with therapy. I am a born and bred New Yorker, and so when 9/11 happened, I asked myself what I could do to help people, both with the memory and the impact of 9/11, which is still affecting us, and the ongoing threat of terrorism. So I've written 2 books about terrorism. One was published in London for their 9/11, 7/7. And then my latest one is Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror, where the first half of the book is for grown-ups and the second half is a picture book for kids about terrorism. And then I do a podcast. So I've been doing it for over 5 years, called The Terrorist Therapist Show. And I just did one today, recorded it today, it isn't up yet, where talking about the January 6th so-called insurrection, domestic terror, what did I call it? January 6th anniversary, terrorists or patriots. And one of the things that really bothers me is how people in Washington are going to be making more of a big deal over January 6th, the anniversary, than they do during the 20 anniversaries that we've had for 9/11. So I've done a lot of different, for the 20th anniversary, I put together a music video that people can find on my website, terroristtherapist.com, which I had going around on a mobile billboard around Ground Zero for the 20th anniversary, and it was basically things like why we should never forget, how those who forget history are bound to repeat it, and I had that over a picture of the Taliban for their first press conference, and then 10 things to do for kids to build resilience, just a number of things. And the idea of it was to get people to realize the importance of remembering that date. There are some politicians who would like us to forget that 9/11 ever happened, and in the meantime, we are in more danger today from terrorists, radical Islamist terrorists, than we were before 9/11.
Can you give a couple of examples of that that you see in the country?
Yes. First of all, I think the biggest one is Biden's pullout from Afghanistan. That not only the surrender in Afghanistan, that not only was an embarrassment and of course killed 13 troops and left all kinds of ability to watch what was going on in terrorism over there, and made Afghanistan a hotbed for terrorism for all the terrorist groups. And so there's that. And the most important part of that is that it encouraged terrorists and really encouraged other leaders around the world, not just terrorist groups, but Putin or China, or to think that we are weak and Biden isn't really protecting this country like Trump did.
Mm-hmm.
And another example is that because of COVID and lockdowns, people had much more time to be on their computers during these past couple of years, and the ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, all of these groups have taken advantage of that by recruiting people through the internet. And what else? Our military isn't as strong as it was, under Trump, and it's just, I could go on. And Biden brought in over 50,000 Afghans, some of whom were loyal to America, helped our troops and so on. But there are certainly an untold, literally untold, because they didn't vet them, number of Afghans who really are jihadists. And they are now spread all over America, and we are going to see the fruit of that, not too long.
What about the border situation? What is your take on how the current administration has dealt with securing the border and or rather unsecuring the border?
Right, that is the other place. They have already found, it's not like just hypothetical, they have been finding, and especially now with more people crossing the border, that some of those people were on our terrorist watch list. Not to mention that they're bringing in COVID and everything else. Fauci, he spouts off all these ridiculous things like how we should have vaccine passports to go on airplanes. And there was something else just now that he was saying even people who are vaccinated shouldn't go into restaurants. He finds new things each day to say so he can get on television. But putting that aside, the thing is that he's totally ignoring. I'm not saying whether those things are right or wrong, but I'm saying that these things, the number of people who would be affected by the things that he talks about compared to the number of people who are crossing the southern border, certainly not vaccinated, and many of them being positive for COVID, they're not even being tested and vaccinated at the border. If there was supposed to be some pretense even of trying to protect Americans from COVID coming from the border.
Yeah, and with a loosely guarded border, then the issue of sex trafficking, of course, should be brought up as well. I'd imagine.
Yes. Yes, that has been happening for a long time, and of course, with the loose borders, that's happening more as the same thing with drugs coming across more. Yeah.
The COVID-19 pandemic, which we're now just about 2 years into, or we're over 2 years, I think from that date that the fish market in Wuhan had reported the outbreak. I think that was October of 2019. It seems that with a 98% survival rate, do you, Dr. Carole, do you think that the media has overreacted, or do you think that these measures are appropriate?
I think that the media has absolutely overreacted, trying to scare us. These are tactics of despots for many, many years, to make people afraid. If you get a population to be extremely fearful, you can control them. And we have been more and more turning into Orwell's 1984, using COVID as an excuse for so many things. Like, for example, why we need to allegedly need to have paper ballots, rather than voting in the polls. The governor of California, the brilliant Governor Newsom, just made that a law that we're going to have for the next elections, at least as long as he and people like him are in power. In any case, we're going to be having paper ballots. Well, certainly paper ballots are a lot easier to, many fraudulent things can happen with paper ballots, more fraudulent than going into polling places and voting.
So in regards to the media, could it possibly be that they have, whether directly or indirectly, they have therefore become an agent of terror to the American people if they've overreacted? Would you consider that terrorism?
I like that. I haven't quite thought of it before in those terms, but one could make the case for that. I mean, there is, of course, part of it also. It's so complex. I mean, that's part of why it hasn't really been. It has been exposed to some degree, but I mean, there's also a connection between. There was just something in the news the other day, or about how CNN. There's a connection between CNN and one of the drug manufacturers. I mean, that's part of the whole thing. There's a whole money, follow the money.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole connection. It's not just about turning us into 1984, but it's also about money. I mean, these pharmaceutical companies are getting so rich off these vaccines and pushing them, and no, it's one vaccine isn't enough. Two vaccines, no, now you need a booster and another I mean, this is absurd. And in the meantime, they're not exposing all of the people who have died as a result of the vaccine and all of the people who have had reactions to it, side effects. And you can't sue them because they have it set up that they protect themselves. And now, of course, really the worst part of it is the kids. Saying that schools saying that kids have to be vaccinated in order to come to school, when there is no way that there has been enough research on kids and vaccines, on the COVID vaccine in any case, because they would have had to do many more years in order to see the ultimate impact on these growing organs. I mean, we've already seen with teens and young adults, myocarditis is a side effect.
Yeah. In my research, it seems that some of these hidden banking schemes, what I'll call schemes, sheltering pharmaceutical companies and that sort of thing, can easily be hidden behind a private bank, which is the Federal Reserve. And recently, as I opened the program, Anthony Sabatini out of Florida, a representative out of Florida, has said that institution itself is unconstitutional. But Dr. Carole, we're also looking at an advancement in technology that certainly the human race has never seen. We don't know this happening in historical terms. And so we're looking at a meshing of technology and the way we live our life. Talk a little bit about TikTok and what you see happening in use of that technology, TikTok.
Well, I find it hard to believe, or maybe, I guess nothing is hard to believe these days, but it is really outrageous. Let's just say it that way. It's really outrageous that TikTok, in its current form, in other words, being owned by the communist Chinese government, is allowed to exist, because they have unabashedly been promoting all of these challenges, from licking toilet seats to shooting teachers, to shooting up schools, to all kinds of promoting drugs and sex and porn, all kinds of things. If you made a list of things that you wouldn't want younger generations to get into, to be influenced by, it's the list that TikTok is using with their challenges, getting people to do things that are extremely dangerous to themselves and to others. And so the fact that this is being allowed to exist and there are so many, it has surpassed Instagram in the number of people who use it. So it's sitting right, it's right in front of us, and every day it's really corrupting people every day, and nothing is being done about it.
So if we can apply the media as corrupting and really terrorizing, in that sense, fear-mongering the masses for I would assume for profit, taking advantage of people in that way, then we can also tie the same parallel to TikTok. But you bring up an interesting point, which is TikTok is owned by a communist regime. Is communism? Do you see that as a threat to the United States?
in the sense of the progressive left. I mean, that is where they're heading, socialism and then communism. That's more of a danger in a sense than Putin, than any kind of takeover of America by an outside country or leader. It's really within our own country. Biden, the Ilhan Omar and friends.
The squad.
What's his name? The squad. But what? I'm forgetting right now. Bernie. Yes. All of that whole little cluster in Washington D.C. I mean, that is where they want us to head. So yeah, it is really dangerous. And the fact that it's owned by a communist China government makes it clear that these things that are on TikTok are not random or not a coincidence or not what somebody in the TikTok office is just thinking up randomly. This looks like fun. It's done on purpose to destroy the thinking of the people who are watching it, the younger generation in particular.
Yeah, and the other issue in regards to these loose borders is that with this movement, the BLM movement, tying in some communism here, because the BLM movement has openly stated that they want a Cuban-style communism in this country, and they're breaking down the police forces that would protect the American people from these type of invasions, jihadist invasions, and certainly these sex trafficking rings. But you mentioned you are a New Yorker.
Could I just comment on that? Because
yes,
BLM is one of the most dangerous and nefarious and destructive forces in our country. Yes, not because they hide behind the idea that they're just trying to get freedom or equal treatment or recognition of how terribly racist America is. But it's not really about that. It is about turning up. They say that they are Marxist. They're on their own website. They have all these Marxist principles. They talk about how they're trying to destroy the American family, the traditional American family, with all of this. Not only the CRT, but the twisted, making kids in school, even in elementary school, think that if they're not trans or they're not some LGBTQ something, if they think that they are the gender that they were born with, that's not cool. You're not going to be, you're not with the cool kids. I mean, all of this, it's all meant to destroy the American family, to destroy the American value system, and it's so that they can then they with their friends in Washington can then turn it into a Marxist country.
And where does this, in your view, you mentioned you're a New Yorker and you've been practicing in Southern California. Where is this coming from, in your view? Why is it that these Americans, such as the Squad and Sanders and even the Biden administration, in my view, are openly embracing these socialistic policies? We've got, this is one thing I like to look at, Dr. Carole, is you look at the Chinese and their embracement of communism, if you will, and then Russia had done that as well. Over 100 years they've embraced, since the Bolshevik Revolution, they've embraced communism. Where is this coming from? From the U.S. Infiltration of it. Where do you see this coming from? Anything alarm you or stick out in your mind?
I get more alarmed every day, actually. I was just reading something today about London and, how BLM has been sort of taking over their New Year's resolutions, New Year's celebrations. Last year they had the symbol of the Black Lives Matter movement as part of the fireworks and so on, and this year they were involved in some other ways. Of course, that's thanks to the mayor. And talking about all, that there's groups there that are also trying to get them to become socialist and if not communist. So it really, I mean, it's the elite. It's the elite group that's supposedly that's ruling the world that is bringing it out in each of these countries. The really scary part is, and I had been hearing about that for years, 20 years at least, about this Illuminati and so on. And I remember there was someone on radio who had a radio show, and I used to listen to it when I was driving somewhere. It was at that particular time. And it seemed like he was a crackpot. Like, what is he saying? What is he talking about? I mean, it was kind of interesting because it was so crazy. And over the years, I have come to realize that what he was talking about, there is some truth to that, because how could it be springing up? It's not just in America. It's not just in England. It's all over well, I don't know, all over the world, but I mean, it's in a lot of countries. And this is very scary. What's scary is that we're waking up to this way too late. It's harder now to fight against it. Of course, I mean, you still need to fight against it, of course. But I wish we would have. I mean, it almost seemed too crazy or too overwhelming to believe in. But I wish we would have become awakened to it sooner.
Had you ever considered COVID-19? Have you ever considered that virus as being used as a bioweapon? Is that something you've ever considered?
Absolutely. I did one of my terrorist therapist podcasts on that. A bioweapon. That, yes, there's still all this pussyfooting around in regard to, did it come from the Wuhan lab, and was it an accident that it, got spread because of one of the bats, or I mean, really, at this point, we're still wondering if it came from the Wuhan lab. I mean, of course it did, and of course it was subsidized. The research was subsidized by Fauci.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that he knew. I'm not saying that he knew necessarily that it was going to be used, or they were going to let it become a weapon of bioterrorism. That's still a little link that needs to be proven. But we do know that he knew it was. He did deny in Congress 3 times that he didn't think that he was supporting gain of function research, meaning turning a virus that is between animals to something that could attack humans. So he did know that. Now, whether he then went the next step to, maybe we shouldn't trust the Chinese, and maybe they could use it as a weapon of bioterrorism. Whether he didn't think of that or he did know that, I don't know.
If we thread in what Klaus Schwab has talked about as being the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum, and Prince Charles has called, a number of global figures have called for a reset, to reset from lockdowns. And we thread in the use of COVID-19 as possibly a bioweapon. Do you see any link as well to how this could be used to install socialistic regimes or communism into countries globally?
Well, yes, that's what I was alluding to before when I was saying that by all this fear-mongering, it makes the population more malleable, where we've gotten more used to obeying all orders, and now the orders are or were lockdowns, or they are still about masks and flights and vaccines and all of that. But it's very easy to go from making people follow mandates about COVID to making them follow mandates about all kinds of things that the government wants, including becoming more socialist. I mean, already, Biden has gotten people dependent upon receiving money from the government, because of COVID. In other words, if you're not working, here we'll give you some money for the businesses, for individuals. That he's already begun this dependency, caused us to become dependent upon government handouts more than ever. And with COVID, now that we don't know, I mean, it's seeming We can't really tell yet with the different variants when it's going to be over. Although I think that Omicron is helping in a sense. I mean, yes, lots of people are getting sick, and unfortunately, and some of those people are dying and so on. Although it has less serious symptoms than the others, but it is in a way serving as a kind of vaccine in a sense that it is conveying immunity to a lot of people once they have it. So that could help in terms of the future, whether we're going to get sick from COVID in the future. But nobody can really predict what's going to happen. Certainly the vaccines, as we come up with more and more vaccines, boosters and all of that in itself could be causing variants.
Yeah. So
it's hard to tell what's going to happen, but if we become more and more dependent upon government handouts instead of working, that's socialism.
And who does it at almost a $30 trillion federal debt? It seems Pete Sessions is a Texas politician that I approached, been over a year now, and I asked him this question. I says, regardless of political party, Democrat or Republican, whoever gets in the Oval Office continues to spiral the national debt out of control. Trump did it. Biden did it. Would this be a concern for you?
Yeah. Yes, it's a concern because, it's like playing with Monopoly money, It's like there has to be an end to this. How is this continuing to... And giving, for that matter, giving people who cross the border money, giving the Afghans who they've brought into the country money, all of these people who come in and don't have a means of supporting themselves, have to get acclimated to America and get some kind of skill, and most of them don't really have marketable skills. Yes, this is... there are a lot of reasons for that. Besides trying to sway an election, it's also these people are going to need government handouts.
Now, you've written for some great publications: Reuters, USA Today, New York Times, LA Times, Hollywood Reporter, Variety, and you've joined a number of programs. That includes OAN. You can mention the others that you've been on, but we've got many problems happening here. Again, I try to pull back, Dr. Carole, and I say, well, what is the root of the problem? You've mentioned this kind of global banking conglomerate that seems to be behind the United Nations. You've mentioned the term Illuminati. This is what seems to be it's a German-based think tank that bore its head in the United States through the Skull and Bones Society at Yale. This is all documented, well documented. Where does the threat really come from? We've seen in the past 150 years these major governments embrace these values that we're told come from Karl Marx, mainly Russia and China. Now we're seeing it almost kind of blow up on a large scale in like California and New York, where these de Blasio is now out, but the replacement there doesn't look like Adams, I think it is, doesn't look like he's any better. And certainly you've mentioned Newsom and some of these California-based politicians that certainly embrace these values. Yet they've never allowed any society to flourish. As we can use the U.S. Society based on its constitution, which certainly is not communist. Where is this coming from? Again, in your view, Dr. Carole, where is this coming from? We're told, and we can find on their websites, George Soros is funding some of these these social disruptive groups, such as Antifa, such as BLM, that are tearing the fibers down from the American families and the American society. Outside of George Soros, where do you think it's coming from, and can you tie it back to this global banking regime that you've alluded to?
Well, it's it's the global elite, so to speak. It's the people who are in power, who are rich and in power, and who would benefit most from countries becoming socialist and or communist, because the more downtrodden the population is, the poorer, the more dependent upon the government, and so on, the more they stay in power, they get more power, they get more money, all of that. And so they are, that's why they're in favor of these things.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt. Talk a little bit about, I want you to talk about what Southern California is like in regards to what you're living at now versus what you were living perhaps when you first moved there, how it's changed, and how Californians are looking at their country today and what's happening. But I want you to visit briefly, Dr. Carole, before we wind down, I want you to visit January 6th. You'd brought that up. We're seeing in the news today that Ivanka Trump was supposedly, per Liz Cheney, asking her father to get involved. I don't know what that means. What happened January 6th, in your view?
Well, as I said, I just did my latest podcast on this. What happened is, well, of course it depends on who you ask, but first of all, I watched Trump's speech that morning, and he did not say, I watched the whole thing, he did not say, he said to go to the Capitol, and after I finished, to walk over to the Capitol, and it was supposed to be a peaceful protest to show that they didn't want the state's votes to be accepted as is, that where there were questions, they should investigate. And he didn't tell anyone to be violent. He didn't tell anyone to damage property. But people, were riled up. I think that the election, a lot of people, including myself, think that there was funny business with the election. Funny business, like the pipes that burst, all of a sudden the number of votes for Trump all of a sudden, and with Biden increased and Trump decreased. It was crazy. Too many things have happened in that election to say that it wasn't on purpose, some of the states.
Yeah.
There's too much. Like I was saying before about the paper ballots. And so now there's going to be, so some of the people, it was all different kinds of people, and they can't be charged as domestic terrorists because there is no federal law for domestic terrorists, but they are, over 700 of them have been charged with various crimes, like entering a building when you're not allowed, or damaging property, or different crimes, things that are crimes, not related to terrorism. But we're going to be hearing, we're already hearing that these people are called terrorists and they're terrible, and they're talking about how we might see the same thing again this year. More people might come to Washington to do something violent, which might indeed happen, and if it does, it's like Briar Rabbit, don't throw me in the briar patch. Which in fact is exactly what they're hoping will happen, so that they can again say how terrible all these people are. Because I think I might have mentioned that they're having these events, and they're doing more for that than they do to commemorate. There should be nothing really to commemorate it. It's certainly not something that you want to celebrate, but at the same, it's just being used for political gain, for Democrat political gain. Let's remind people how terrible. We're going to see hours and hours of video on mainstream news of the storming of the Capitol, and it's just a way to try to make political hay, because Biden has done so much that has ruined this country that they need to grasp at straws to find something to try to say, oh, look at them.
Dr. Carole, I'm going to ask you a question, and to be very frank, is there a conspiracy, and I'm not saying a theory, I'm saying is there a conspiracy to destroy the United States of America? Is there a group, or an organized effort outside of this country that has infiltrated the country in an effort of conspiracy to take it down? Are we witnessing that type of effort?
I am not sure whether it's from outside the country. I haven't really come across, anything specific in that regard, but I just think that there are a bunch of people, I've mentioned some of them, who are like-minded and are working together to try to bring this country down. Included in that is all of the stuff, the anti-patriotism, from the people who turned their back on the American flag, who, were going to the Olympics, and they people who should be grateful to this country for giving them these opportunities.
Yeah.
Same thing, one of the things I would really like to see happen, that I would like to start working on, is bringing back the Pledge of Allegiance and singing patriotic songs in every classroom in America.
Yeah, well said. Thanks for saying that. Before we close out, and I want to give you some time to basically convey a final message that you want listeners to walk away with, but I also want you to address, you're in Beverly Hills, you're right next to Hollywood. What are you seeing in that regard in Los Angeles? What's the buzz on the street? What are people talking about? Are people aware of the changes? Are they embracing the changes in the country? You take people like Matthew McConaughey, which he had done the Dallas Buyer Club. He worked with, he did an interview with Fauci. Of course, a number of years ago, Clint Eastwood was talking to a chair, which caught people off guard. What's happening? What's the general gist there in Los Angeles in regards to the current state of the union, if you will?
Well, I think people, other than at the award shows where you get some people giving diatribes, political diatribes, which is why they haven't been getting as many viewers as they usually did. But other than that, I think people are like not thinking enough about it. There are some of these people, like you mentioned, who are thinking strongly one way or the other. But really, a lot of people are just thinking about, how am I going to get my next movie made? That kind of thing, and not really thinking about what's happening in this country.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Again, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Carole Lieberman. You can find her website, terroristtherapist.com. Carole, leave listeners with some final comments. What would you like them to walk away with?
Well, I would like people to realize that our freedoms are really in jeopardy, and it behooves every single one of us to do something to make sure that we are showing our appreciation for this country and are finding out what's going on in Washington and even in our own city and states government, and to vote, to try to be careful. Our very Constitution is at risk with all of these executive orders that Biden is making and all of the other things that are going on. We really are in a very critical point. And yes, I think everybody who's a parent or is in contact, or a grandparent, if you could do whatever you can to try to bring back saluting the American flag, pledge allegiance to the American flag every morning in the classrooms, and bring back singing American patriotic songs at the same time. Because I think that has caused us I think that would do a lot to bring kids back to some of the founding traditional values and getting them to appreciate this country.
A native of the Big Apple, America's psychiatrist, Dr. Carole Lieberman, thank you very much for joining the program.
Thank you.